This today's series on connecting people in science is hosted by CitSci Alberta Community of Practice. Our webinar today is focused on empowering future stewards with our special guest, Lynn Smith from the Peavine Metis Settlement. My name is Catherine Pierce, and I am the Executive Director for the Battle River Watershed Alliance. I'm also a member of the steering committee for the Alberta Citizen Science Community of Practice. And I'll be your host today. I want to take a moment first, before we go any further, to acknowledge the place in which we live, work, and play. Members of the Citizen Science Alberta Community of Practice come from across Alberta. This is the ancestral homelands of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Treaty 4, Treaty 6, Treaty 7, Treaty 8, Treaty 10, and the Métis homelands. That's inclusive of districts 1 through 22. Our Indigenous people have met, gathered, hunted, and stewarded this land long before the arrival of settlers. Traditional knowledge and ways of knowing the Indigenous people are important components of our work. And as a steering committee, we are very much committed to finding opportunities to combine that those ways of knowing into Western our Citizen Science Alberta Community Practice brings together individuals and organizations with a goal of growing a citizen science community practice, of building capacity and tools, and enable observational and community-based science into science-based. The Citizen Science Community of Practice is guided by a steering committee, many of whom are here today. We're also open to having more people on our steering committee. So if you are interested and have the time, please reach out to us and let us know. You can put a message in the chat or just reach out to us through our website. And this is how you can find us. There's many different ways. We are on Instagram, we are on Facebook, and we do have a CitSciAlberta.com website. I'm very excited to tell you that we are launching a new hub. This hub was the brainchild of our last Citizen Science in-person session, and there was a conversation among members of our community of practice to ensure that we have a significant platform and a way in which we can share our resources, share our projects, share our information so that we can learn from each other. So we will be previewing that new hub at the in-person session on October 30th. And we hope all of you will register and join us at that session. There's links to registration in the chat box. Today, it would be nice to get for Lynn, our presenter, to get to know some of you. So we're going to open it up to a quick poll question, two questions, and we're hoping that you can tell us more about who you are and who's in the room. So we'd like to know, what is your affiliation? You should be able to see the poll questions online right now. Thank you, Kiara, for putting those up. What is your affiliation and what is your primary area of focus? So if you can answer those two questions, we'll give you a minute. Yeah, if it looks like most people have responded, if the results are not changing quickly, you could stop and show us the results. Well, this is exciting. I am seeing a range of affiliations, groups participating. Always interested in what the other might be. So thank you for putting in your information in the chat box. And we have been seeing this a lot lately, but considerable representation from the water side, but quite a bit also from biodiversity, which is exciting, and climate and air. Thank you. Thanks, Kiara. If you want to close that poll, that's great. Let me take a minute now to tell you a little bit about what's upcoming for us. As mentioned, we have a few more Wednesdays in October. We will be meeting with eBird Canada, a presenter from eBird Canada, who will be looking at how to manage data using transformative tools to really be effective in managing that information that we get back from our community science practitioners. We'll also hear from Dr. Patrick Hannington from the University of Alberta on place-based partnerships on October 23rd. And most importantly, I would love to encourage everyone to sign up for our in-person workshop on October 30th. We will be at the Bison Lodge in Edmonton, and our goal will be to talk about how citizen science and policy monitoring can drive change. So hope to see all of you at that session. Our speakers will be, our guest speakers for the in-person session will be the executive director from the Stocky Institute, as well as a representative of our steering committee from Environment and Protected Areas. Both have some really great insight on how the work that they are doing is driving change. So we're excited to hear about that. But I want to move on today to talk about our current focus for today, which is empowering future stewards. We're very lucky to have with us Lynn Smith. Lynn is from the Peavine Metis Settlement. Lynn's presentation today will be a little bit different from our last webinar. Lynn and I and all of you will be around a virtual campfire, and it will be a matter of conversation. And Lynn will share with us the work that she has been doing and give you a little bit more insight into how she has built out partnerships to be very effective in the work that they are doing in that community. So again, it'll be ask questions. Your questions will go in the chat in the second half after our conversation. As we learn more from Lynn, we will go into a question and answer session that will be moderated by Bradley Peter from the Alberta Lake Management Society. And then that'll be our opportunity to go into a little bit more detail and get some of your questions. So I just to tell you, the Connecting People and Science series is an initiative of the Community of Practice. And we have, we've really tried to focus on some of those key topics that came out of our last in-person meeting, in which we really wanted to focus on ways in which communities of practice can drive change. So we've picked the topics like place-based partnerships and using transformative tools and talking about empowering our future stewards to support the work that you do. And I hope you can find connections in your own projects to the work that Lynn will share today, and also those other topics that we've covered in our session. Lynn is a proud member of the Peavine Metis Settlement in Northeast, which is northeast of High Prairie. She's currently working with the settlement as a regional planning coordinator. And through this role, she works to promote the sharing of knowledge and works with the communities to build competencies in their consultation teams to autonomously monitor their land, generate and interpret data, and implement management programs. We're excited to be here with you, and we hope we'll find the insights shared will be both relevant and inspiring. So I will stop sharing my screen and we will turn things over to Lynn. And let's get started. Thank you for being here, Lynn.
Well, thank you for having me. It was quite an honor to hear from you, Catherine, and asking me to be a panelist on this, and to know that you've seen me speak at a different conference. So thank you for that. So the project that we originally started with back in 2019 was an environmental monitoring program. However, we took it a step further in the fact that we wanted to incorporate the Western science in on everything. So then it was a matter of finding out how we can do this. And it was actually at a PAC meeting that I ran into Kevin Kimball of NAIT. And we got to talking about the different things and ideas that I had. And he actually got me in with Carmelita Crisp of NAIT, and things just absolutely took off from there. Met their team in the clean tech department, and yeah, mind you, this is 2019, so a lot of discussions actually took place over COVID, and we never actually got to hit the ground running into laboratories or anything until COVID bypassed. It's unfortunate I couldn't get my slides and stuff working here in Halifax. So thanks to Matthew Menzies there for sending me the picture behind me. It's actually a picture of my two environmental monitors. The brown-haired lady, that is Sarah Sinclair, and the other lady is Winter Flett. And they are, yeah, it's just a nice picture of them being in the lab and doing some water sampling and processing the samples that we through NAIT's labs. But with that too, I also invited to this webinar Matthew Menzies. He is a counterpart of NAIT, and he's also here in Halifax with me. So it is now 3 o'clock our time here. So, but anyway, so the history of the project that we were doing, I met Kevin, got to meet Carmelita. We started working on how we could have our own stewards that are trained in Western science. And because we're remote, and bringing the science out to the field was one of the main things. And it was actually quite interesting because the scientists that did come out, they were absolutely amazed. They have not been out of the lab. So it was a treat for them to actually be out at the lake or out at the river and actually collecting the samples themselves. So it was, you know, very interesting and quite the breakthrough. When this all first started, I figured, okay, this is a project that'll probably take me, you know, a year to complete, maybe, if that. We're still just scraping the tip of the iceberg on this, and it's now been how many years since 2019? But it's absolutely stemmed off into many other facets going forward, and just bringing it back to the community to see what we're doing and having the community involvement. So I guess with that, Sarah and Winter are actually my first environmental monitors to see a laboratory with NAIT. So what happens is that with the training that they have received, they went out to the field and they collected samples, they collected water samples, learned how to do all that, and then brought the samples back, traveled to NAIT with their samples, and then learned how to process the different things that were needed through NAIT's labs and document them and put them in a database and write up reports on it. So prior to all of this, though, we had a public engagement with the community, and we asked them what areas of our water system, of our watershed, what areas were important to them and what we should be looking for. So we collected all that information, and NAIT was there with us. And we started working on a program on what area, like we couldn't test all the areas. We will eventually, but at that point in time, we we're just starting with 10 significant areas. The ones that were mostly talked about is what we went with. And the concerns that came with that area prompted what we were looking for, such as like dissolved oxygens or any kind of contaminants that may be in that area. So with that, then we took that, we tested the areas, went to the labs, brought back the information, and we shared it. Now that my girls are trained in the Western science part of collecting water, we shared that with the public and got feedback. And this is how we married Western science with traditional knowledge, in the fact that what we've gotten back, what we were asked for and then what we've gotten back was the traditional knowledge end of it. And really, it was the traditional knowledge that prompted the concerns, but we're using the Western science to make things tangible, if that makes sense. So that's basically the description of the project and partially the history. And why we got started with the water was because, and now I'm aging myself on this one, but when when I was a youngster, right, it was no problem to just go to the nearest river or, you know, the lake that we're at with the family, just to go and grab a bucket of water or a cup of water or something and drink it. And now that my kids are adults, it's like those same watersheds, those same lakes and creeks and rivers, you can't drink from. Nobody'd want to drink from them. So why the change in only a couple decades? Like it's so that was what prompted the question why we started with water. And at the end of the day, water is life for everybody, not just the Indigenous communities, but for everybody. But anyway, so I'd like to, Matthew, if you don't mind, just kind of introducing yourself to everybody and our partnership with NAIT.
Absolutely. So I'm Matthew. I'm part of NAIT's Indigenous Partnerships and Engagement team. So we are part of NAIT's Industry Solutions, which is kind of a combination of our Applied Research Department and our Continuing Education Department. So where NAIT, I guess, is a little different from maybe the university model with research is that all of our research is applied. So it's always with an industry partner and it's always aimed at solving a goal and not necessarily just around, advancing theoretical knowledge. And so where our department comes in, and which was pioneered and really spearheaded by my manager, Carmelita Crisp, that Lynn mentioned, is that we kind of take that same approach to working with industry to working with Indigenous communities. And we let these Indigenous communities completely guide and lead the applied research projects that we do with them. So when we work with a community like Peavine Metis Settlement and with somebody like Lynn, she comes to us and says, we have this specific problem. How can we solve it using the facilities that you have and the educators that you have so that we can build the capacity of our community members to go out and do this citizen science on their own and for the community to solve the problems that they have. And that, in a nutshell, is what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Matthew. So I guess, Catherine, do you have a question?
I would, thank you. So you talked a little bit about, you and I had a chance to talk about this in earlier, and you didn't come into this position with the thought that you would be solving these problems or answering these questions. I think in your role, you had, you were just, you were there listening to the community, and then realizing that there was an issue within the community, and then took it upon yourself to find ways to solve or better be able to respond to the community. Can you tell me a little bit about the start of that? Where did you come from, and how did you get to this place where you found community volunteers?
Well, that's a little bit of a difficult one. So yes, I did. I actually started working with the Peavine Metis Settlement as a grant writer. And really right now, that's where a lot of our capacity comes from is grant writing. And just the inner workings of everything and doing the grant writing and learning all the different things that are needed. Oh my God, it was such an eye opener to things and to look for answers and solutions. It was, I'm not a person to ask someone else to solve my own problem. So I want to get out there and I want to get it. So this was just a logical road to go on. I don't want anyone solving it for me. And at the end of the day, it makes industry accountable for what they do, because we are now capable of reading all the data that they collect themselves. So yeah, it's how do you answer that one? It was just it was very eye-opening, at the end of the day. Can we come back to that one? Let me think about that
Absolutely.
for just a moment.
I thought what was interesting, that is a couple of things that you mentioned and just now is you took it upon yourself to make the connection with industry partners, and including then also how to do the water sampling, and found that training through NAIT, and other partners. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that connection, both between the industry partners and those that helped you with the training for sampling.
Yes, yes. So, when things are done environmentally, there's reports that are written and reports that get sent to the different communities as to what's in their water and this and that. And we rely on people to tell us that it was okay. And this is back, like I said, when I first started. So I would have basically a stranger walk into my office, give me a report and say, this is your water's okay. Here's the report. Doesn't explain anything to me. All it is a bunch of numbers. Doesn't mean anything to me. So I have to take you at your word for it. While I don't really care for that, I need to know myself. So hence why we started the program, and having people go out there and collect it. And they're actually taking their own samples. Like, there's no trades, no nothing. We're collecting the samples, putting them in our own fridge. When it's time to go to NAIT, we take our own samples in our own vehicles, take them to NAIT, put them there in the labs, and we start processing. So at the end of the day, we know it is our own samples that we collected, and we are generating our own data, which to me, I think is huge. And at the end of it, we could now take that data that we learned how to interpret through the Western science, and we could look at industry's data and compare them. And in that sense, it is what's making industry accountable. A perfect example of it was actually just recently, a couple of days ago, actually, I was contacted by an oil company that wanted to come and do some water and soil testing on Peavine. And it's an abandoned oil well site, which is fine. And they asked me if I could provide an environmental monitor. I said, I sure can. And we can do water and soil testing too, right alongside your environmental people. And the guy kind of went, well, we have people that do that. And I said, so do I. And he goes, okay, but well, our people will have the reports and everything. And I said, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. However, at the end, give me a copy of your report and we'll compare it with our report that we generate. And it took a little bit of a, a aha moment for him. He's like, well, I'll get back to you. And he did. The next day he did. And they're absolutely looking forward to going out with our girls and seeing how everything is going. So it's just an example, right? It's just something that wasn't really expected. And now I think going forward, that will end up being the norm and being a pioneer in it. It's starting with us, but I could see future communities actually doing this too.
And I can see the benefits of that in terms of your ability to report back to your own community in and speaking to the priorities of that community. Can you give some examples of how you have had those community engagements in the past and how you've been able to set priorities, but also share the reports back into your community? How does that happen?
So, like I said, right in the very beginning, we gave an introduction as to how we're planning to proceed with the entire process, although we didn't have really baseline data as of yet, but we have to start somewhere. So we had on all the tables, numerous tables, we had maps of Peavine, and we had the community separate into different areas, different tables, and they could put with sticky notes their concerns on the areas of what they wanted to have looked at. And it was a pattern actually formed. And one of the mainstays was really, we have the South Heart River that goes right through our community. Really cuts Peavine in half. And it's really our drinking water and where our fish come through and stuff. So at the end of the day, that was the main concern that we needed to look at. And then the lakes that were there too. So, so that's how we started with that. Once we did some of the testings on the ones that were the most concern to most of the public, then we took those samples, processed them at NAIT, and then NAIT actually trained my monitors on how to interpret that data, how to write the reports back. They made slideshows. And then when we came back to Peavine to discuss it with our community, NAIT was actually there too, sitting right at the front with the girls, helping them, translate it over to the public in a way that it's conducive to our community. So when I do share stuff like on screen, like I was hoping to have some examples of samples and stuff that we did. And at the end of the day, really, it's just Western science that I show our Indigenous data that we collect stays with the community. So, but it is there. It is there. So.
Yeah, that's great. And do you invite your industry partners to those conversations with the community, or are there certain time? How do you give feedback to the industry?
That is actually really just starting. Like I said, I was hoping this project would take a year or two, but completely fooled myself with that. So now I wanted to be sure that my girls, and I do mean my girls, I actually don't have any boy monitor, not anything to do with that. It's just I have girls and I call them my girls. But they're training, and in the middle of training, I didn't want to disturb them with industry at that point. But now they actually have credentials through NAIT for their water and soil sample. And in actual fact, Sarah and Winter they were actually chosen to be interns at NAIT. So they start here actually right away. So yeah, they're actually the first Métis interns. And I do say that proudly because that was a long, drawn out process to have, that was a whole nother deal because Métis people fell in the cracks of things. We dealt with that too. So at the end of the day, throughout Canada, Sarah and Winter are the very first Métis interns.
Wonderful. That's exciting for the whole community. I'm also interested in learning more about any of your other partners that you've been working with. How do you see the work that you're doing with NAIT and your other partners? So I guess it was a two-part question. Are there other partners, and how do you see that supporting the sustainability of the program?
Well, at the beginning, it really was NAIT that I was involved with so completely that when I talk to anybody, I always tell them NAIT is our partner. NAIT is our partner. They're along for the ride. And then I got onto the OSAM program, and that is where I met Bradley. I think Bradley's on the line here too from ELMS. So we do a lot of projects with ELMS too for water testing on some lakes. We've actually done some eDNA testing there too. And that was back in February that we did that. We're actually still waiting for the results of that. And hopefully we're going to restock that lake with fish if it's conducive to do that. But with ELMS, that is where we're trying to venture off into is with the fish. We actually use some fish health with ELMS. So very, very, very interesting. And then not only that too, I guess all my questions, all my questions actually really started when I started working with the Lesser Slave Lake Watershed Council. And I am actually a part of that watershed council too. And I talk with, converse with Megan quite a bit. So, and at the end of the day, you know, with all these partnerships, we could try and share all that knowledge going forward.
Right. That's great. I'm also, I'm curious, when it comes to blending traditional knowledge and the type of now monitoring that you have, are there any learnings that have come from your work that you could share with us that, it's not always easy to take the traditional ways of knowing and put that into Western science and put that into a data collection model, and the water sampling in of itself. Do you have any suggestions or learnings for us that you could share on ways in which we might be able to do that in other projects?
Okay, that was just can you just say that again? Sorry, what was the question?
To bridge traditional knowledge and the actual monitoring and water quality monitoring and training and data collection that your team is now doing. Do you have any learnings from that where you were taking that traditional knowledge and the traditional ways of knowing and thinking about the land and how you brought that into your monitoring program? Do you have any to our own projects and better building our connections with Indigenous communities?
Yeah, so when it comes to the traditional knowledge, it's really a holistic point of view that we have to look at. So when talking with people with the community and the places that they chose, they also informed us of the surrounding area, like what kind of vegetation was on the riparian area, and even further into the depth, like what is that area, what grows there, and how is the water affecting it, right? So for me, it's kind of hard to interpret because that's just something that I've really grown up with to understand through our elders. Like it's really an inherent thing, right? So then I take that knowledge and then I go to NAIT and I go, okay, this is what's wrong. This is what we're looking at. Why was there medicines here and they're no longer here? why is this here and they're no longer here? And it has to do with the river systems, right? Like every time things were interrupted, like let's say some places the rivers were straightened, the creeks were straightened. Well, that has a huge impact on what was there for foliage and stuff too, right? So taking that into account and looking at it at a holistic point of view, then it really kind of gave us the ideas of what to look for in water in our collaboration with NAIT scientists. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. I think, you know, when I think about when you and I were chatting too, and how you know, the information you shared today, there, it seems to me that what we're lacking is those connections to Indigenous communities and starting with those questions first and foremost.
Yeah.
You know, what those observations from within the communities, why has the landscape changed? Why are native plants not there? Why does the game, is it those big questions from within the community, and bringing it back to that the ways in which we can encourage observation.
Yes, yes.
You know, I think those are important to us, and I see in our own practices that in Western science we only focus on one aspect of that at any given time. And you know, while we might focus on water monitoring, how does that teach us about the overall impacts or contributors to that water quality? And I think both questions and priorities is key.
So that boils down to really regulations, right? And that was another key feature to all that we're doing here, is that when we met with industry at the beginning of my work, I guess, meeting with industry, and then they start saying, well, we're meeting government regulations. Well, what are those government regulations? And then when we started asking, what are the government regulations? And then they started telling us, and they're really not conducive to our Indigenous values. And one such example is, say, forestry. If they're crossing a creek, a river, when they're going through there, at the end of it all, they just need to know the turbidity and the flow rate is the same as when they first disturbed it. Well, that doesn't mean anything to us. Flow rate and turbidity, it just means the water's colored and it's flowing. At the end of the day, when industry leaves an area, we should be able to sit downstream with the leaders of that industry and have a glass of water. Are you willing to have a glass of water with me? Because that's what makes things livable and continue forward.
Right. I'm wondering if we can switch over to you, Matthew, too, and ask a couple of questions for you. I know Lynn has outlined how she came to you, and then you offered training. What has that? How has that changed your program and your practice?
I think what really makes our, I guess, offering, if you could call it that, unique is that it changes with every individual partner. They all have different needs, they all have different goals, and really what we base on our development of our research questions and our research projects is the needs of the community. So it's always different every single time, and it evolves continuously. We always learn new things, we always learn new approaches. And our researchers themselves, like Lynn was saying, the first time they came out was the first time they actually got to do something outside of the lab. So as they continuously develop their skills in engaging with the community and engaging with these wild areas and doing the research in the field, it just gets better and better and continuously improves. And I think that's really what makes us, and these relationships that we have with communities like Lynn's makes it so special, is that it's always custom, it's always built specifically to help the community solve their problems. to the best that we can, right? And it's all based on what they need and what they want. We don't go out with the goal of, telling Lynn this is what you need to research. We don't want to do that at all. She needs to tell us what she wants to research, and we'll figure out a way to do that.
Right. And
That-
can you,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
So that actually stemmed off into a bunch of new branches too, with the questions that keep popping up time over time. So now we've actually have quite a number of projects with NAIT, and a lot of it has to do with vegetation studies and seed collection. We now have our youth involved every summer in seed collection, and then we're having those stored, and then the youth also learn how to germinate those same seeds, how to store them and how to germinate them and how to plant them again. So it's really gotten so evolved, and at the end of the day, it's NAIT and Peavine together.
Yeah, we really just try to walk beside our partner, and when we try to walk beside Peavine and try to offer them the solutions that we think would fit for the problems that they're seeing and what their traditional knowledge is showing them and what it's telling them. And then we can try to, I guess, in very strong air quotations, validate that with Western science.
So do you offer training, and what other kinds of things help make these programs happen?
So when, I guess, the basic structure of an applied research project with an Indigenous community is that we start with a research question that's developed directly in conjunction with a community. And then we go about trying to solve that research question or answer that research question with the applied research. And throughout it, regardless of what kind of project it is, whether it's like plant and seed research, whether it's water and soil monitoring, there's always a capacity building element built into that. So we don't want to just come in and do the research and walk away. We want the community members to be involved from the very beginning all the way until the end and be trained to build that capacity so we can ultimately like work ourselves out of the job.
I love the land to lab component to that as well. That's a great opportunity. Does it, where does the funding come for these sorts of projects?
So we are able to, Lynn will often use her grant writing background and grant writing skills to secure grants. And then on our side, we're able to secure grants and leverage her funding as well. So it's all grant funded.
For now.
For now.
So I think that we are, I just have a few more questions for you, Lynn, but I'm excited to hear about your vegetation, the project, and how you've engaged youth on that. Could you just give us a quick overview of that project and how those youth have become engaged? You mentioned some regular summer programming. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that?
So we gotten involved like with the soil component of our sampling. We've gotten involved with the CBR, and they're out of Peace River. They're just another arm of NAIT, and through the training that we received from them, we moved into a seed collection. And I thought, what a project that would be for our summer students, from the to go from the high school to doing what they do naturally with their family and harvesting, but to realize that there is a career, that is actually a career path that they can follow, stewardship with the forest. So with talking with Jean-Marie with the CBR, we created a program where we try to get the secondary students involved first to start the training for seed collection in the spring. And then we move on to the summer students for the high school students, and the secondary students will start training the secondary students going forward. But during all this, throughout the summer, at lunchtime, we provide the lunches, or we have industry provide lunches. But the elders are invited to join our youth at the lunches, so then they could collaborate together on what is important, what seeds are important for collecting. And it's been very good so far. And then it's the seeds that they collected. We started this project last year. And then through that project, we actually germinated, my environmental monitors germinated some seeds out of the CBR. And we now have a Indigenous food sources orchard that we broke ground with this year. And they replanted those seeds. They germinated those seeds, made the plants, and then the summer students planted the seeds that they collected from last year, this year. So now they see the progress of what they're doing. And it's quite exciting, actually. And then it just kind of clicked. This year, it just kind of clicked with the students that they weren't just out there picking different berries or different plants, but for them to see that the fruits of their labor are there. And it's getting quite exciting.
That's wonderful. Good. I see that Bradley has come on screen, and I would like to turn it over to Bradley to take questions from participants. So please take a minute to ask Lynn about her programs and some questions. I see that there's already some in the chat box. And I think that what I'd like to do is start with allow Bradley to, I'm going to share my screen. And we have one important question that Bradley's going to start with today.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Lynn and Matthew, for the conversation today. We are asking all of our webinar presenters this one main question. And so this question comes from our steering committee. And in short, that question is, how is your work driving change? So we can ask that maybe to Lynn and to Matthew. But the question is really, is your work having an impact on policy or decision-making or stewardship or conservation or some sort of wins for the environment or community? We really want to focus on this type of science and converting that into change. So maybe we'll start with you, Lynn, on that question.
So driving change, when it comes to policies and with the government, I guess, it's not really doing the change yet. However, having our people with the mixture of the two knowledges, the traditional knowledge and the Western science, has now made us competitive, I guess you could say. So when things come through our area and the things that we need to look at, we could look at it on on an equal ground. And it's really making people accountable for their actions. It'll start making industry accountable for the stuff that they do. And it's creating careers that were just never really perceived as being a career before.
That's great. Thank you. Matthew, did you want to tackle that same question?
Yeah, and I think I can just add on to that. Really, what we want to do is play any small part we can in the communities getting power and sovereignty and accomplishing their goals, and to even just play the smallest part in that by, training a couple of students to do environmental monitoring, or having a cohort of young kids go out and do their seed collection so that they can get out and see that there is a career field where they could be doing what they love doing, being out in the bush, collecting seeds, planting seeds. So if we can play any small role in getting that in giving the communities the power, the sovereignty that they want, and accomplishing their goals, that's how we drive change, I think, at NAIT.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wonder if we can elaborate on that piece a little bit. Given the subject of today's webinar, Empowering Future Stewards, I think this is something, even in my own work, that we don't do a good job at maybe like quantifying. It's not something that you can really measure the benefits of really easily, teaching and empowering young people. And I wonder, Lynn, is this something that you think really strategically about, or is this something that just comes really natural to you in terms of empowering young people in your community?
Well, it's not really just empowering young people. Like, yes, they are the starting point and the ones that will end up with these careers. However, it's empowering the community as a whole, because this information that we gather can be used by leadership, you know? So really, it puts the settlement in the driver's seat, like completely.
And Matthew, is that something for you as well that's strategic, or that we just kind of inherently understand is a good thing to do, so we keep doing it?
Yeah, it's definitely it's the end game, right? That the community is in the driver's seat. So I think everything that we do, the strategies that we build are aimed at that end game of the community being in the driver's seat and having their goals met.
Yeah, that's awesome. We do have some questions from the chat. I will address some of them here. So we have one from Frank, who says, how do you manage the risk of trained people leaving the community for opportunities elsewhere? For example, do you require your two girls to stay in the community for a defined period? Is that a concern of yours, Lynn, that they're going to take a job at NAIT and leave you?
Well, yes, and I thought about that right from the beginning, and it's absolutely, you know, a good question. And I talked with the girls about it, and I'm like, you know, in order to empower you, I have to be able to let you go. That's what we do with our children, right? To empower them, you need to be able to let them go and hope that they come back and give them that option. To date, though, I know Sarah and Winter are like, we're never leaving. We're coming back. We'll finish with NAIT and we're coming home. You know, but at the end of the day, it is home. Like, I don't know, in our Indigenous community in Peavine, majority of our families are close. And if we could work from home, we would be the happiest people on earth. So why not try and create careers that can be from home and looking after our own land? So not saying that they won't ever leave. At some point, they probably will. However, hopefully I have more students coming up that I could enroll in this and have that stewardship going with other students.
Yeah,
They're just leaders. They're leaders right now.
Yeah, yeah. There's a question here from your friend Kirsten on my team. She says, hi, Lynn, after collecting data for the next few years and building out a good database, what next steps or actions does Peavine feel are critical in moving forward towards possible restoration or other types of projects? How do you feel this data can be used to help answer community questions and concerns?
Well, like Kirsten pointed out, it's really the beginning data. And like, I was really a fool thinking that this is a year project when it's actually going to be multi-years. The first year was just setting the baseline, actually setting up the project, second year setting up the baseline. However, you have to revisit that so many times, so then you could actually get a record and start to predict where the line is going and where it's showing you. Because, you know, the first data that you collect, some of it may just have been a one-off. So you need to do it multiple times to see if there is a pattern there. So you're setting schedules to test this one spot this year, and then again next year, or maybe you test it in the summer, test it in the winter, and then do it again the following year, just so you get that data and that flow. And then you could really look at it and see if there's something that you can see and predict, and where you go from there. So like I said, we're really just scraping the tip of the iceberg. However, I feel that with the water testing that we have done with Elms on the lakes, once we get all that information back and we really look through it and peruse through it, and then maybe we could look at restocking all our fish.
Yeah, I think it brings up a good point too, that just data collection alone is not going to drive change. Like, we have to be constantly aware of what our end goal is and critical of the data and thinking about the data and asking, are we still collecting meaningful data? And it's really easy, I think, in a citizen science project or community science project, to just get hung up on we're collecting the data and that's the goal. But so it's so nice to have someone like you who's helping drive, the sample sites or the location so that the data we're collecting can also be meaningful at some point and not just kind of like a stamp collection exercise.
Yeah.
Matthew, did you have any comments on that piece?
No, I think you both summed it up perfectly. It's about, yeah, you getting meaningful data that can actually be used to solve a problem and to make better decisions.
I think
And
that answered the question.
yes, for sure. There's a question for Matthew. Can you speak a bit more about your role at NAIT in establishing this partnership? How does a group get involved in your program? Who do you involve at NAIT? Is it students or professors? How are you funded? How many community partnerships do you have? This person wants to know it all.
That's about 20 questions. So I guess maybe I can sum it up with just kind of our engagement model. So we try to do, and this is a term that Carmelita, my manager, coined, with NAIT to nation. So we either go out to nations or they come to us directly and we engage directly. We try to get to know them. We try to understand their community and what potential issues are on their communities, and we let them really lead the charge on what they want and what they want out of a relationship with NAIT. So it's always, and it takes time, right? It takes personal relationships. You're trying to build trust with these communities and with individuals like Lynn. So it really comes down to like these personal relationships, and that's really what my role is to work with Lynn to try to understand the needs, and then I don't know if I'd go so far as to like say manage the project, but work alongside Lynn so that I can give feedback to the researchers and to understand how we could do the project better, how we can alter things and how we can continue to work to solve problems.
And we have a lot of communities participating in water monitoring in the oil sands region. And is this program, available to other communities to reach out to you and say, here's what we're thinking about, or, we want a Sarah in a winter of our own at NAIT, like, can communities reach out to you?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, we would love that. We would love this to be in every community in Alberta if it could be. That's the goal.
That's great. Tracy says, for Lynn, I really enjoyed hearing about your experiences. Can you talk a bit more about how the results are useful to the community and if the knowledge confirmed or gained so far has led to community action? You kind of touched on this a little bit, that we're in the early stages of collecting data, but is there anything else you want to add there?
Well, it's the collection of the data for water and stuff like, yes, it pretty much stays the same for the most part, but where we're located, where Peavine is located, our backyard really is the Peace oil sands. Actually, some of our residential area too is the Peace oil sands. So that was like another driving force to all of this is how do we document this and how do we make sure that we could prove that there's a change. So if there is something that is leaching into our water and stuff, we should be able to catch it because it'll show up as different. But not only that, just the different things. Like one big one is a new well site went up, and it actually went up in an area where there's blueberries. So there is a family that was a little upset that their blueberry patch is basically gone. However, with that being said, we have the information in our database as to what the area was like, what is there. So when it comes time for reclamation, we will have those seeds in NAIT's banks, hopefully some point in our own banks, and we could actually plant those seeds back to where they originally came from. And with that being said too, like there again, we're spewing regulations. It's the government states that you put soils back to neutral, which is a pH of 7. Blueberries don't grow in a pH of 7. They need to be in a pH of 5. So with it being on our own land, let's put it back to that pH of 5 and put those blueberries back. So that, you know, that's actually kind of a, I don't know, I want to say a promise, but that's something that we're working towards and bringing our land back. Hence why we have the Indigenous Food Sources Orchard, because that's also a project we have with NAIT to research how we could grow these things back in abandoned right-of-ways and abandoned well sites.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know about the orchard project. I'm wondering if you can comment too on this idea of data sharing and data ownership and sovereignty, because so often in community-based monitoring, there's kind of an assumption that data should be totally open and shared on a public platform and for everybody. But with Indigenous communities and the history that they have of being taken advantage of by government or scientists, oftentimes there's a different conversation around data ownership and sovereignty, which is that we want communities to decide when that data is able to be shared. And I wonder if that's a conversation happening in your own community about what data gets shared and what data stays kind of within your own community.
Actually, it's funny that you brought that up. We were talking about that earlier today with my cohorts that are here with us, and then we're starting to get into a mapping program with NAIT. So that mapping program would include all our data on it, but it would be at our discretion and how it's used. So then when we do meet with industry, when we do meet with politicians, it's our data that's coming forward, but we could choose what layer we want to share. And we could look at the different impacts of what community member may be used in this area, or maybe what was here, or, you know, it would all be there at our leadership's fingertips, hopefully. That's the dream of the future anyway. So.
Matthew, do you have a comment on kind of data ownership? I'm sure this is a question that NAIT's had to ask themselves as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So NAIT's, I guess, policy is that we don't retain any intellectual property. We don't want the data. The data was, and always has been the property of the Indigenous communities. And if Lynn wants to take the data and share it, great. If she doesn't, great. It's up to her. It's up to her community. And we just want to be able to just deliver that data. And that's the end of it. That's the end of our fingers on their data. We don't want it.
Yeah, it's been an interesting lesson for us here at Holmes, because our standard kind of reporting method is to write a report and post it on our website, and everyone has access to it. And so it's been a really interesting experience for us to ask, like, what does reporting look like to a community when the data is, not to be shared more broadly, and what are creative ways we can achieve that? And so it's been great working alongside communities like Peavine to try and figure out how we do that successfully. There's a question here from Tracy. Lynn, can you expand a bit more about how Western science and traditional knowledge have been used in your community and the roles that these approaches have played?
Well, really, like I said, we're just entering into a lot of stuff, like, even though it's been a few years. So we're really just integrating at this point. As for how we can use it, that's more of a driving force behind leadership and how they want to use it going forward. At this point, we're just really collecting the data, we're presenting it to our community. And there's some things, I could use as argument when I go to different areas, different conferences or something. I could point out different aspects. However, the Indigenous knowledge that is collected is ownership, like Peavine owns that. And that is really up to leadership to determine what they use for that. But it gives them another bargaining tool and another, I don't know, a force, I guess, to contend with.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here from Madison. She says, I'm very impressed with this initiative and the approach you've taken. I particularly love that you're enabling members of your community to pursue careers in environmental monitoring. Smiley face. And I hope the program does expand. For Lynn, I'm wondering if you would be willing to share more examples of observations your community has had in the South Heart River regarding water quality, fish populations, etc. Have there been changes over time?
With the South Heart River, that one has had, it's really a bone of contention for our community, and the reason being is because of the dam that had went in. So prior to the dam, it's not within Peavine, it's outside of Peavine, but when that dam went in, there was no fish ladder on it. So now we have, for lack of a better word, bottom feeders. We have suckers and we have jackfish. We used to have walleye, and we used to have whitefish that went through that river. But since the dam, no more. And there is still concerns with what is going on there. And the driving force, I guess, before all this started, is that river flowed forward and it flowed backwards and it stayed stagnant, and it really, if we found out that it's all conducive to whether or not they open the gates or close the gates or something, right? But that has an impact on the fish that are there. So when we do fish in that river, the jackfish that come out of it look like long snakes. So is that because of the way the river flows, because of that dam, or is it because of not the proper amount of oxygen in that river? Is it because of the algae that grows in it when it's all stagnant? These are questions that we need to know, and why I've been talking with Bradley here with the elms and hoping to try and restock these areas of concern, if we can do that, and bring fishing back to Peavine, because we used to fish there. Yeah, decades ago there was fishermen fishing, and now we don't really fish there.
Yeah, I think when we first met, that was your main concern, was that river and that dam. So that's nice to see that Madison's interested in that as well. There's a question here for Matthew. It says, not to imply any nefarious intentions, but what are the primary benefits to NAIT in these projects in terms of academic currency? Like, do researchers at NAIT publish findings from these projects? Or if not, the results, the learnings from the projects?
There are no benefits in academic currency. Like I said before, they're not our findings to publish. If Lynn and Peavine Metis Settlement want to publish their findings, great, but they are, at the end of the day, their findings. They're not NAIT's findings. They're not the property of our researchers. Yeah, we take no stake in academic currency. That's not the game we're in.
Great, thanks. There's a question from Carrie. Hi, Lynn, do you have any plans to work with other settlements or Indigenous groups to share the training your community has gained through this process?
Absolutely, because I believe what we are doing now is pioneering a course of action that will eventually go through other Indigenous communities. So yeah, if I don't know, I could put my number in the chat, I guess, if you want. You could call me and we could talk more, and I could introduce you to NAIT and the people that I deal with at NAIT. Have no problems with that whatsoever. If I am empowering more people, the better.
That's great. There's kind of a similar question from Kirsten at Alms. It says, hi, Lynn, thanks for sharing the amazing work you're doing. You're really paving the way for communities. Have you discussed findings with other settlements or nations near you? And have they been noticing similar observations or problems that your community is also facing?
I haven't really gotten to that point with other communities. Like they express that they have concerns. What those concerns are is really with that community. However, one community did have my monitors, the two that you see on the screen, come out and do some water testing for them, and they did do that. Now, one set of water samples, though, really isn't enough. You need to have more. So whether or not they go back out, that's up to the community to ask them if they want them to come back out again, or if they want to train their own.
Yeah.
Or have my girls train them. I'm good with that too.
Yeah, exactly. Here's
But
another
it's
question.
it's funny that you say that now to bring that up, because I felt I don't have environmental monitoring background per se. I started this with grant writing. My background was actually accounting, and going forward in this, and I'm having my girls train, and they have all these credentials. I felt crazy to be a supervisor of people that have more knowledge than I. So I approached NAIT with that question. I'm like, I feel weird. It's not right. So then it's funny now, because now I'm a student of NAIT going through this process, and I'm having my two monitors train me with NAIT. Full circle.
Awesome. There's a question here that says, can you envision a future of Indigenous leadership in which land use policy and practices are, integrated with Indigenous priorities and Western science? So like, can we expect industry reports that would include your community science priorities and the results of your work?
I can envision it. Absolutely. Now, whether or not that comes to fruition is another story, and it will take years for that to come. Probably within my young monitor's lifetime. I'm hoping I'll be retired by then. But hopefully the work carries through though and keeps on going. But I honestly think this will be empowering for a lot of communities.
Yeah. I wonder if you had access to, a $5 million grant. It sounds like you're good at getting grants. So let's say you get access to a really large grant. Like, what's the ultimate vision that you have for your community? I think I've heard you comment before on even setting up your own lab space and stuff like that. Do you have kind of a grander vision if you had access to more resources?
Yes, I do. And that is actually a discussion that we have been in with NAIT, and we've actually applied for a couple of grants for really a greenhouse. So we'll be producing our own food, but not just our own food, but for reclamation purposes, the seedlings that hopefully we have picked or we have stored, not just from our community, but from wherever we need to replace that ecosystem, right? But not just the seedlings, but the undergrowth that goes with it. So that's where all the research and stuff comes in, right? And yeah, so it just trying to bring that area really back to what it really was, and as close to it as we possibly can.
Yeah, that's a commendable goal for sure, and I hope you're successful in getting funding to work on that. There's a question here about your involvement with the Lesser Slave Watershed Council, and it sounds like you are really well connected with different nonprofits and groups that can help you achieve these goals. But there's a question about if your work has been adopted into their own state of the watershed reporting. Like, have you been able to integrate some of your community concerns into the broader Lesser Slave watershed?
I've talked with Megan on different aspects of stuff. However, I'm not going to be presumptuous in making that, because at the end of the day, really, I learned a lot from the Watershed Council, and what questions to ask. But talking with the Watershed Council, more than happy to collaborate and work together. At the end of the day, like my environmental monitors too, my whole department, actually, we all have our cabin training. So, there was some stuff that I was talking to Megan about that, and it's like, well, we could help. We could absolutely help. So I have no issues with that. However, For other organizations, I'm not going to be pushy. Whether they want the information or not, that is something they would have to approach me for, and then I'm willing to share.
Yeah. And after this webinar, Lynn, let's say a bunch of people think, I want to reach out to Lynn and get a project going. Can you comment just on the importance of relationship building with you and your community, maybe before jumping into projects or partnerships? Is that something you guys take really seriously, the relationship aspect?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And any community does that, right? And when you meet with people personally, like I would meet with the person in person and get that body language and how you want to go ahead, move forward, right? And that's what really stuck out to me with Kevin Kimball is that, yes, he did approach me and he was quite, I want to say sheepish, but you know, he did ask questions. I talked to him, and it's hilarious now because we were at a conference when a couple months ago. We're at a conference where both of us were speaking, and our relationship now is at a point like that with NAIT and with the few people at NAIT, but our relationship with Kevin, he just out and out blatantly asked me in front of a group, like a room full of people, how come you're so scary to approach sometimes? And I laughed at that. And it's like, well, you know, we've been friends now for a long time. So you could ask that question. He never would have asked me that, you know, when we first met. But at the end of the day, you just need to build that relationship, get to know a person. And, yeah, the partnerships will come. Everything will come after.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we can go ahead and start wrapping up our webinar now. Kiara, if you're able to, yeah, Catherine's got a thank you screen. Awesome. Of course, I want to thank Lynn and Matthew for joining us and for all of our participants for joining us. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I'm so grateful for you both taking the time to do this. If our attendees can't tell, but you're both in Halifax right now at a conference. So thank you for taking time out of your day to do this. Your insights have been really invaluable. Let's see, we want to highlight some of the next steps in our webinar series here. So maybe Catherine or Kira, do you have our next slide to highlight our next webinar? If we can't get that up, that's okay. I can always walk us through it. There it is, great. So if you haven't already, we have a full webinar series, but you do have to register for each webinar individually. And our next webinar is Transformative Tools, Managing Big Data with Kyle Horner from Birds Canada. And that's happening next Wednesday, October 9th at the same time. And if we can grab our next slide to highlight our in-person conference, great. So again, we do have an in-person event occurring in Edmonton on October 30th at the Bison Lodge. This is a free event to register for, so I hope everyone will sign up, and I hope that we'll see you all in person. The theme of the day is citizen science and policy, monitoring to drive change, which is really that big question that we're asking of all of our webinar speakers. So the workshop is aimed at supporting citizen science projects, creating a network of organizations and individuals committed to citizen science projects, and engaging the citizen science community in Alberta. So the day I'm really excited for because we'll be showcasing our new citizen science collaboration hub. So this is going to be a new digital space to achieve all of those objectives. We hope to see you all there. If you want to feature or highlight a citizen science project that you love, please let us know. You can always send us an email at info@citscialberta.com. Maybe I'll get one of my colleagues here to throw that in the chat. So we hope we'll see you all next Wednesday. And I hope we'll see you all in person at the Bison Lodge on the 30th. And with that, again, I want to say thank you to Lynn and Matthew for being so generous with your time today. And I hope we'll see you all soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, Matthew. Nice to meet you. Bye, Lynn.
Thank you for having me. And also, Bradley, there in the chat is my contact information. If anybody wants to contact me, feel free to give me a shout.
Perfect. Thank you. That looks great. We'll make sure to circulate that after the event for those who weren't able to join as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.